It's really interesting for us, this participatory thing. It's not a language, it's not a term we use at all. There's community collaboration grants. It's always defined by our granting agencies, what exactly we do. But the participatory practice, there's certainly a history inside of our in Canadian work of it, but it's not a language that we're used to using. But regardless, what we'll do is we'll kind of look at our body of work inside of this conversation of participatory, because it's an interesting frame or lens to put on what we get up to, because it does range from a term that we've just discovered as we were just talking about this in events, predatory participatory, which we are at times, whereas Michael put it, story vultures, and all the way through to, I think, more of a defined participatory work as we're kind of encountering here with what we're up to now. And there is sort of a trajectory from our beginnings to where we are now, and also we're having a bit of a response to the notion of participatory and the conversation inside of amateurism, virtuosity, all those kind of things, and how that falls into performance. Because where we come from, we're both trained theater actors to begin with, and the work we did when we first came out of school was very much about virtuosity. It was about extended rehearsal and creation periods of creating new work, of highly physical work, a lot of singing and harmony, which I never really nailed, but I was good at the physical stuff.
You're a good dancer.
Thank you. But our sort of 60, 70 minute long presentations where every single moment was absolutely perfectly executed. If it wasn't perfectly executed, we berated ourselves for it. We went through that for 6 years. Then we formed a new company called Theatre Replacements. One of the very first show we made was with a very participatory man right now, Darren O'Donnell, who was here with his haircuts by children a couple years ago, and he's gone in that direction more than anybody else that we know in our community. And we started making works that were first kind of, that lived in that world of virtuosic and highly structured, highly rehearsed, and we've kind of moved into a different territory. So we'll just talk about a couple of them. WeTube is definitely a predatory participatory. We don't even tell the participants that they're being used. What we do with this piece is we go into YouTube videos that are suggested by audience members. We show the YouTube videos, and then what Mike and I have done is we've gone into the comments that fall underneath those YouTube videos, and we record those comments verbatim into iPods, and then we speak them in a variety of dramatic scenarios while the video plays again quietly behind us. Our Christmas setting, for example. And we have cameo appearances that pop up on stage. And how it works is audiences that are watching, say, Thursday night show will suggest the videos for Friday night, and it just keeps on regenerating and reinventing itself from performance to performance. The next one, which one should Clark and I?
No, Speak Please a Moment we were going to talk about.
Talk about Span. You talk Span.
Okay, so Speak Please a Moment. Both of these projects, WeTube and Speak Please a Moment, had their first incarnations at this this project that is orchestrated by 11 Vancouver theatre companies called Hive. And it's basically a space invasion where 11 companies go in, we each get assigned a different room, and you make short pieces for a roving audience of about 200 people. There's a bar, and you have to sort of aggressively fight your way to see as many shows as possible, which some of the audience don't like and some of the audience really into. The great thing about the event is it doesn't cater to only theatre people. It is really an audience we've never seen before. And this project was the one we did for last year. It will never happen again. Hi, we've decided it's over. But Speak Please a Moment involved cell phones. So you needed a cell phone to come into the room, and you wrote your name and your number down on a piece of Post-it and handed it to an operator. And then during the course of the evening, or perhaps in the next couple of days, you could be at home in the bathtub, which actually happened, you would get a phone call, and these phone calls were then, these conversations were broadcast over a speaker system in the room. And the conversations varied. We did a lot of research into structuring good conversations, and so this happened over 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
So we gathered, and we would sometimes call people, they would be in the room, and then they would be talking in the room. while their conversation is broadcast, but they could also be somewhere in the space, or as I said, they could be at home caught on another day in the conversation. Yeah, anything else to say about that?
No, good, great.
Yeah, let's go to greatest. Or we could talk about 100% Vancouver, actually. Why don't we do that?
Oh, good. Okay, so 100% Vancouver is a show that was originally conceived by Remedy Protocol, which a Berlin-based company that does all sorts of fantastic, highly conceptual, but very entertaining pieces of performance. We took one of theirs called 100% Berlin, which has also been 100% Vienna and 100% somewhere else,
I'm just going to pass that.
and created something called 100% Vancouver, which is you start with one person, and you create a series of demographic categories, and you have to gather 100 people that fit inside all these different categories, and you start with one person. So I would ask Michael, who would be a woman, gender was one of them, and then there was an age requirement, there was a marital status requirement, there was a first language requirement,
Where you lived.
and a neighborhood requirement. So she would fit each of those 5 categories, and she would be responsible for finding the next person to fit inside those categories. And it goes on and on and on until you're into between 80 and 100 people. It gets very, very complicated and specific as to who that person has to be. It has to be an 85-year-old woman who lives in this tiny neighborhood in Vancouver, who is single, who is et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it gets more and more specific. But what it eventually allows to happen is that 100 people end up on stage that make up the demographics of a city. And the process of creating it is probably the most interesting part, certainly the longest and most involved part, which is going and interviewing these 100 people, gathering their stories, scripting the stories that would kind of fit into a certain, would fit into a performance, and then structuring a performance in about 5 days. That happens, in this case, only 3 times. And it's a really, really beautiful show, because you're actually just watching a demographic experience. Yep.
How did the people hear about it? Did they really take part in it? How did they get it?
We started with I'm not even sure if it's the term, a demographer. Somebody who works at the library and just studies demographics, statistician. And she was our first person. So the way that people hear about it is just through word of mouth, through their friends.
They get asked by the next. The idea is it's kind of a game. The first person is supposed to get. We had to get involved eventually because it got very tough to fill the.
Well,
exact
the
demographic.
difficulty was Vancouver proper is 500,000. Berlin, where they did it the first time, is 1.5 million. So the amount of people you can find in the categories were easier. We made it very difficult for ourselves. So at about 65, the chain broke, where 65 could not find a 66 that fit the language requirement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then we had to start a second chain, and by 85 it had snapped again, so we had to set a couple chains going. But by the end we ended up with 100 people on stage, interacting and playing these games.
Is that just your term that is in medical? Is that technical term?
No, I don't think so. It's just, we call it a statistical chain reaction, which had a nice ring to it, and it looked good on press stuff. Okay, greatest cities in the world. Here is a perfect example of predatory participatory work.
We're going to talk about 2 shows now, more about the process of how we made these works, so you get a little sense of our practice.
And how we do it, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So with greatest cities in the world, the idea for the show came as a title first. It was just this idea of something that rang in our heads as a nice title. And we looked into the occurrence of famous city names as small towns in different places. And we found that Tennessee, for whatever reason, has an enormous amount of famous city names as little towns. There's Paris, there's London, there's Moscow, there's the mayor of Moscow.
Oh, she's the mayor, that's right.
There's Leon, he's the barbecue man that works in Moscow. And so what happened was I went down in 2008 and spent 2 weeks traveling around Tennessee, meeting people. And the way this system works for us is we create about 3 questions. And we drive into these places and then we just walk around and randomly meet people. Well, this one we randomly met people. And the question was, what makes your city the greatest in the world? City or town the greatest in the world? London doesn't even exist on maps anymore. what would you do to change this city or town? I would say hillbillies. London, they're not hillbillies, the bar is hillbillies. I guess
Just to
they're
clarify,
technically
he's not
hillbillies, too.
calling them hillbillies.
They're proud hillbillies, I think. But and then if you could live anywhere else, where would it be? And we would start with that and a description of what we were up to. We were very clear on what we were up to, that we were down here, we had recording devices. And we said we're recording these stories and we're going to cut them into pieces. And we're going to restructure them into some kind of live performance that will be performed by actors.
The eventual team, then the team returned down again. There was actually part of the people that made up the creative team. Some of you went back down again to.
We went down for another. It was really quick. It was too quick, I think. It was 6 days where we brought down 6 of us. The people are going to be performing, so they could actually have a personal connection to these people. And
they did develop very strong, meaningful relationships with people.
which caused an interesting conflict in the actual generation of the show when we started making it. And we were very careful who we cast. We cast a lot of people who some were first-time performers, some were dancers, even though it was going to be very heavily text-based. And brought them down to meet these folks. And we created all these really wonderful relationships with these people. And then when we started making the work, we realized the richest material in terms of text was the stuff that sort of highlighted the conflict that Canadians and Americans have, because we get a lot of conflicts with those folks. And they're similar to anyone else in the world. And there's all the stereotypes of America that started coming up, and that was the stuff that was generating the most interest in the creative process. Even though, to a person, we loved everyone we met down there. So we ran into a real problem when we were making this show of reflecting our experience and the people that we met without turning into assholes. There's a thing that happens in Canada called Talking to Americans. This comedian goes down there and he just basically asks Americans questions about Canada, and they have no idea what they're talking about, and we all laugh at them. And that started to feel like that inside of this process, and it started to feel really, really predatory. And in retrospect, we would make some changes to how we made the work and how the work looked in the end. Instead of making it so product-based, it might have been a little bit more about the process of meeting these people, and you would have seen that in the final result, as opposed to what we ended up with, which was fine, but it landed in this world, this muddy kind of world of not really making any kind of statement whatsoever, because we didn't want to offend the people we met down there. At the same time, we wanted to make something that was mildly interesting.
So no clear statement.
It didn't really have a clear statement at all.
Yeah. And the texts that were used, basically, there was about 10,000 pages. No, how many pages?
No, there's about 2,000 pages.
2,000 pages of
sorted.
text sourced from the interviews. We cut it down to a script of about 80, but it was all verbatim text. So all the language was taken from the participants. This is Young. She's not a professional performer, and she gave the opening monologue.
But the idea I think some of the ideas that were created in advance of actually even going down there held too strongly through the entire process, and it kind of slowed us down. Mm-hmm. We wanted in the end to be able to create some kind of a perfect city on stage. And
I don't know if it's possible.
I don't think it was
With the
possible.
material we had.
But that certainly influenced our casting of who we brought in and how we wanted to bring in the everyday performer, the everyday person to speak the text.
So that's Greatest Cities, and then the other project we'll talk about. These are our 2 most recent projects that we've done, and with larger casts. We don't normally work with a lot of people. We do work with a lot of people, but it's usually not very many performers on stage. So this was a bit of a switch for us. And then most recently we've done this show called Dress Me Up in Your Love. Similar to Cities, it had about a 3-year process of different development periods over 3 years. And basically for this one, we collected outfits of significance from participants all over the world. Our co-producers in Germany, we went there and did a development period, and were able to interview and collect some outfits from there. And basically clothing from people, and then interviewed them, and they shared their stories about why these outfits were significant, and they ran the spectrum. And then we sort of mixed, as we always do, we kind of intermingled this information with our own stories. So we really looked at how the material related to our own lives. And then in the performance, essentially, people are dressing in other people's clothes and telling their stories. And with this one, there was more of a sense, it was less predatory, more of a sense of wanting to honor the stories. So there were some really beautiful themes that came out just quite naturally. Illness was one. A lot of the people had cancer or had people who had died from cancer, mothers and birth stories. So there was a really nice cycle within the material that just sort of emerged, and we went with it. The other interesting thing for the show was we wanted to, along with that, sort of honor the way that the stories were passed on to us. So there is no script for the show. It's the actors on stage, the performers are remembering back the information that was given to them. And sometimes we tell each other stories as well. And then there's improvised structures within the piece with the text where we actually take on the idea of lying very obviously and play a little game to just to show how stories can fracture, and how when you take somebody's story on, what the responsibility is of that, and how you can change things and how people interpret things differently. We had a live musician, a woman we worked with a lot called Veda Hilly, who did the music all live from the show and also performed in the show and shared her stories as well. And this one's going on tour next year. We're going to take it back to Germany.
Can I just ask a quick question? Are the people whose stories you're sharing, are they part of the audience?
They have been in different parts of the process. When we were in Germany, there were quite a few people that were there. In several of the development phases, we always do a feedback session where we sort of show where we're at, and then and it's really nice when the participants are there, actually, because you can say she's sitting right over here, and I think it's also they get to see what sort of happens with their stories and how the themes sort of tie in. So
certainly, and for the Vancouver presentation, where the majority of the outfits came from, all those people were invited, and they were there opening night.
Yeah, in fact, we just got a call as we left from a woman called Lulu who had a purple suede dress that Janis Joplin's bourbon is spilt on, and it's quite a famous thing. She just called and she said she wants her dress back, so we're going to try
So we have to make a replica.
or give it back to her. She wants to see it. There's the dress right there. Is an Expo 86 McDonald's uniform. These are two dresses that were given by the same woman. Jamie, you look so good in that dress. There's Jamie's tattoo. She hates that this show is revealed. Yeah, do you want, Toby, did you have a question? Just 5 minutes?
5 minutes, we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah.
So where we are now, the most recent project, and I guess, well, part of the conversation of why we're here, which we're figuring it all out still as we go. We're here for 5 days to just sort of explore the idea of creating something new for this festival in 2013. We started something new recently with a group of senior citizens in Vancouver at a community center called Movie Group, where we are watching important films from the 60s and 70s when they were the classic movie-going demographic, and reading the screenplays that are attached to them, and then having conversations to follow. We only do this for 2 hours a day right now, or 2 hours a week right now.
Yeah.
And we just have conversations about what those movies meant to them and what they were doing during that time, if they saw the premiere, if they remember anything else specifically from that time.
Mm-hmm.
And one game that we play there quite a bit is we ask them to just sit and think for a minute or two on a perfect photograph from that period. And they consider the photograph, and then they describe the photograph to us, and that just generates a whole bunch of conversation, which we record, and again, we're in the process of transcribing those conversations. And the end result, we're not exactly sure what it is right now. Toby said something interesting, that somebody had said to him that part of the participatory process is, it's the process, and the final performance is just the trace of that performance, and that's resonating for me right now, especially with this movie group process. Because the conversations we're having inside those rooms are beautiful, and we're not going to be able to regenerate that experience on stage, even though we are ultimately a product-based organization. We make shows and we tour shows. Mm-hmm. But we will, I think it's going to really frame how we create this show. We'll have 2 nights of performance of something at the end of it. And so in terms of a trajectory of participatory work, I'm not exactly sure where we sit with it right now. We're still experimenting with it, and we're very curious about the process because we're kind of sick of sitting and writing our own stuff. We do like to story vulture as much as we can. But well, we'll see how the conversation goes after this exactly. If we're honoring the process or if we're just developing a very process that's specific to what we're interested in, or how we can continue to work inside of it. But that's that, in a nutshell. 17 minutes.
In a very fast 17-minute nutshell. So we can talk.